Owen Marsh read the letter twice before he understood it. It was taped to the refrigerator at eye level. Not his eye level. Hers, right where a 7-year-old would find it between the crayon drawings and the school lunch menu. Bold black type across the top. Coverage terminated. He stood there in his work boots, still smelling of cut metal and diesel, and he did not crumple it. That was the thing. A weaker man would have crushed it in his fist. Owen smoothed it flat instead. He pressed the wrinkles out with his thumb, slow, so Poppy wouldn't hear the paper tear. The surgery to fix his daughter's heart cost $214,000. He had a truck, a toolbox, and a jar of cash on the counter. He called the insurance line and pressed the numbers and waited through the music. And when a voice finally came, it was recorded and it was calm. The policy lapsed in March, it said. The procedure is not authorized. March, one missed payment in a slow winter. And the cardiologist had given the valve 41 days before it failed for good. There was a nurse who worked the night shift at the children's hospital. She had stayed 40 minutes past the end of her shift, for no reason he could name, just standing near while he tried to breathe. She looked at the denial letter shaking in his hand, and she said it quietly, almost like she was afraid of it herself. There's one legal way this surgery gets covered by Friday. She didn't finish. Not then. If you believe love is built with two pairs of hands, this story is for you. Before we go further, if a story about a father who won't beg and a woman who won't leave is the kind of story you're here for, subscribe and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Owen and Poppy's story travels. Every name in that comment section is one more person who stayed to watch this family fight. Now let me take you back to the morning the letter was still just an ordinary Tuesday. The alarm went off at 4. Owen didn't need it. He was already awake, the way he'd been awake for most of 18 months, lying in the dark doing math that never came out right. He got up without turning on the lamp. He knew the room by feel. Left of the bed, the work jeans folded over the chair. On the dresser, his wallet, his keys, the little orange bottle of Poppy's medicine he checked every morning, like a man checking that the sun still worked. He worked 2 jobs, though he'd never have called it that. He called it one job with 2 shifts. Mornings he ran vac, furnaces and heat pumps, and the sad old boilers in the county's oldest houses. Nights, when a call came, he welded. Fences, trailer hitches, the broken bucket on a farmer's loader. His hands were a map of the work. Old burns, silver scars, a knuckle that never bent right after a pipe wrench slipped in the cold. He was 34 and he moved like a man 10 years older, and he never once complained about it, because complaining wouldn't fix a valve. He made 2 lunches at the counter while the coffee brewed. One for him, packed in a dented steel box. One for Poppy, in a paper bag, because her lunchbox had broken at the hinge and he'd fixed it with electrical tape and she'd told him, gently. The way she told him everything, that the other kids had laughed. So the lunchbox stayed home now. She got a paper bag with her name written on it in his blocky welder's print. Poppy, he drew a small star next to it every day. It was the one soft thing his hard hands knew how to make. At 6 he woke her. She was already half awake too. She got that from him, that trick of never fully sleeping, and it broke his heart that a child had learned it. Morning, bug, he said. She smiled up at him, and even in the gray light he could see it. Her lips. They had a color they were never supposed to have, a faint blue at the edges, like she'd been eating a popsicle in winter. The doctors had a long word for it. He had a short one. He called it the reason. She dressed herself, slow, because slow was all her body allowed. He waited. He never rushed her. He'd learned that rushing cost her more than the extra minutes cost him. She came down the stairs 1 step at a time, one hand on the rail, and halfway down she stopped to rest. Just stood there breathing. A 7-year-old, resting halfway down a flight of stairs. He watched from the bottom and kept his face easy, kept his voice easy, and said, "Take your time. Truck's not going anywhere without its best passenger." She laughed at that. The laugh turned into a small cough, and she pressed on and reached the bottom, and he did not scoop her up, though every cell in him wanted to, because she liked to arrive on her own 2 feet. The backpack was the same story as the lunchbox. A strap had frayed clean through. He'd sewn it back with fishing line and a curved needle from his tackle box, and reinforced it with a strip of the same electrical tape. And Poppy had decorated the tape with marker, so it looked, she insisted, on purpose. He'd told her it looked great. It did look great. It looked like a father trying. He drove her to school in the truck, and while she sat buckled beside him, he counted the cash from the jar without her seeing. He tucked the bills under his thigh on the bench seat, and he thumbed through them at the red lights, silent, his lips moving. 300 and change from a furnace job, 90 from a weld. It was real money. It was good money for a Tuesday. And against $214,000, it was a teaspoon against a flood. And he knew it, and he counted it anyway. Because a man counts what he has. That's how he was built. You don't cry about the mountain, you just start carrying rocks. He walked her to the door. He kissed the top of her head. "Who's the toughest kid in Marrow County?" he asked. It was their thing. She rolled her eyes because she was 7, and she was already tired of being tough, but she said it back. "Me, that's right," he said. "Now go be tough at spelling." And she went, one careful step at a time, into the low brick school, and he watched until the door swallowed her. And then he sat in the truck for a full minute, with his hands on the wheel, and let his face do the things it couldn't do in front of her. Then he drove to his next call and fixed a widow's furnace and charged her half, because she reminded him of nobody in particular and everybody at once. That was Owen, before the letter. Decent, tireless, alone. You needed to see him whole before you saw him hurt. Because what came next wasn't fair, and you should be angry about it, the way I was angry writing it down. The denial didn't come out of nowhere, though it felt that way. He'd carried the coverage for years. When Poppy was born blue and they'd whisked her away and said that word, congenital, he'd bought the best plan a man with no employer could buy, and he'd paid it every month like a sacrament. But there was no company behind him, no HR office, no group rate. Just Owen and a bill that came in the mail. And in February, the furnace work went dead, the way it does when a winter turns mild. And the money got thin, and a payment slipped past its date in the shuffle of a hard month. He caught it in April. He called and paid and thought it was fixed. It was not fixed. In the fine print, a lapse was a lapse, and a lapse reset the whole machine. And the machine did not care that a 7-year-old's heart was on a clock. He learned the full shape of it in the cardiologist's office. The doctor was kind and had a diagram of a heart on a laminated card, and she pointed at a small flap of tissue and explained that it was failing, and that it needed to be replaced, and that the window for doing it safely was closing. 41 days, she said, if she was honest. And she was the kind of doctor who was honest. After that, the risks climbed steeply. Owen nodded and asked the question that mattered, so we schedule it. And she looked at him, and she said the surgery required prior authorization from his insurer, and that without it, the hospital could not proceed, and that the estimate was $214,000. He called Sentinel Health Alliance 11 times that week. He learned their music by heart. He learned the recorded voice. The policy lapsed in March. The procedure is not authorized. He got transferred to a supervisor who was sorry, genuinely sorry you could hear it, and who explained the prior authorization wall like a person describing weather. Nothing she could do. The lapse was the lapse. He could appeal. Appeals took time. He looked at the calendar on his kitchen wall, the one with the days crossed out, and he did the math again. The math did not care that she was sorry either. So he did the thing a decent man does when the mountain won't move. He started tearing his own life apart for rocks to throw at it. He drove to the county office and put the title of his truck up as collateral for a loan. The truck that carried his tools and his daughter and paid for both. And the man behind the desk ran the numbers and offered him a figure that would not have covered the anesthesiologist. He sold a welder he'd bought used and rebuilt himself. He picked up every call, every shift, welded until his eyes swam and his hands shook, and at the end of 2 brutal weeks he had, by scraping every corner of his existence bare, maybe $11,000. 11 against 214. He sat in the dark at the kitchen table with the number in front of him, and he did not break. He was not a man who broke where his daughter might hear it, but something in him went very quiet and very cold. The specific cold of a man who has finally understood that being good and working hard are not, in fact, enough, that the world has a fine print, and the fine print has his daughter's name in it. The night nurse was named Maren Osei. He'd met her without meeting her, the way you meet the people who take care of your child during the worst nights of your life. She worked the emergency floor and the pediatric side both, wherever the hospital needed her, and Poppy had ended up under her care twice, both times at 3 in the morning when the fluid built up in her small lungs and she couldn't get a full breath. Maren was 32, steady in a way that had nothing to do with being calm and everything to do with having decided a long time ago not to flinch. She had a dry sense of humor she used like a tool to loosen a bolt of panic in a parent's chest. She'd looked at Owen the first bad night, seen a father white-knuckling the bed rail, and said, "She's going to be fine tonight. And you're going to sit in that chair before you fall down in it and give me a second patient." He'd sat. He'd remembered that. The letter went up on the fridge on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, Poppy had a scheduled check that turned into a longer visit, and Owen ended up in the family break room off the pediatric floor at 11 at night, holding the denial letter he now carried everywhere like a wound he couldn't stop touching. Maren came in to restock a supply cart. She wasn't even on his daughter's case that night. She was just a person doing an unglamorous chore, snapping open boxes of gauze and gloves, and she glanced at the paper in his hand and read the words upside down, the way nurses read everything upside down. And her face changed. "Coverage terminated," she said. "Not a question." "Lapsed in March," he said. His voice came out flat. "1 payment. They won't authorize the surgery. I've got 40 days. He stopped. 39 now. She didn't say she was sorry. He noticed that. Everyone said they were sorry, and it was starting to sound to him like the sound water makes going down a drain. And this woman didn't say it. She kept stocking the cart. She lined up the little bottles with their labels facing out, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, in the same flat voice a person uses to read a grocery list, "There's one legal way this surgery gets covered by Friday." He looked up. "What?" "You need a plan that's already active. You don't have time to fix yours or buy a new one that'll cover a pre-existing valve on this timeline." She closed a drawer. "But a spouse's plan is different. If you married someone who carries good coverage, that's a qualifying life event. You could be added to their plan, effective the first of the month. And a spousal ad can't turn away a dependent child for a pre-existing condition the way an individual buy would." She said it all the way through, clinical, exact, like she was reciting a dosage. "Married by Friday. On the plan by the 1st. That's inside your window." He almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in his chest. "Married by Friday," he repeated. "To who?" She restocked the last box. She flattened the cardboard and tucked it under her arm. And then she looked at him directly, and for the first time there was something behind the steadiness, some deep thing he didn't have the room in his head to read that night. "I carry the hospital's plan," she said. "It's a good plan. I don't have anybody on it." The room was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall a monitor beeped its patient rhythm. "You don't even know me," Owen said. "I know your kid can't breathe at 3 in the morning, Maren said. "I know you smoothed that letter flat instead of ripping it up. I've been doing this 11 years. I can read a man in about 4 seconds, and I already read you." She shrugged, and the shrug was armor. He'd understand that later. "It's a signature and a courthouse and a form. People do harder things than that for strangers on the news every day and get a nice little segment about it. This is just paperwork that happens to save a child." He should have asked her why. Any sensible man would have stopped and asked her why a woman would marry a stranger to save a child she wasn't related to. But he was a drowning man, and she'd thrown a rope. And you don't interrogate the rope. So he missed it. He missed the thing she said next, the thing she said so lightly and so quickly that it slid right past him and past everyone, spoken to the supply cart and not to him, while her hands were busy and her eyes were down. "I know how the billing works," she said. "I paid off my brothers for 4 years." And then she wheeled the cart toward the door, and paused, and added the practical detail like it was the only detail that mattered. "We'll need rings. For the clerk. For the paperwork. So nobody blinks. I've got one in a drawer somewhere. Gift shop band, $12. I bought it as a joke a long time ago, and never threw it out." A flicker of the dry humor. "Turns out I was saving it for an occasion." She left. Owen sat in the break room with the denial letter in one hand and, in the other, a way out that felt less like a miracle and more like a cliff you jump off because the fire behind you is worse. He didn't sleep that night. But for the first time in 2 weeks, the math had changed. And he never once, not that night, weighed what she'd said about her brother. It went into a vault in the back of his mind, and the door swung shut, and it would stay shut for a long time, until the moment it blew open and took everything with it. They married on Friday. The courthouse in Marrow County was a squat brick building with fluorescent lights that made everyone look ill and a linoleum floor worn pale in a path from the door to the clerk's window. It was the least romantic room in the state of Ohio, and everyone in it seemed to know it. Owen wore his one-collared shirt, the blue one, ironed on the kitchen counter that morning with an iron he'd had to dig out of a box. Maren wore green scrubs. She'd come straight off a shift, and she'd be going straight back to one, and she stood there in her work clothes with a paper cup of vending machine coffee gone cold. And Owen thought, absurdly, that she looked more like herself than anyone he'd ever seen at a wedding. 2 co-workers stood as witnesses, a respiratory tech named Louise and a lab woman named Fern, both pulled from their break, both a little bewildered, both kind enough not to ask questions in front of the clerk. Maren dug the ring out of a Ziploc bag in her scrub pocket. $12. A thin band the color of nothing in particular, a little tarnished at the edges from years in a drawer. She handed it to Owen so he could put it on her, because the clerk expected that, and Owen's welding-scarred fingers fumbled the tiny thing and nearly dropped it, and Maren steadied his hand with hers without seeming to think about it, and together they got the little ring onto her finger. The clerk read the words in a voice, with all the feeling of a man reading a parking ordinance. Owen said, "I do," and it came out rough. Maren said, "I do," and it came out even. And he glanced at her, and she was looking at the ring on her hand with an expression he couldn't name, there and gone. The clerk pronounced them married. He said, "Congratulations," flat, already reaching for the next form, and stamped a paper, and it was done. Owen Marsh had a wife. Poppy Marsh had a path to a surgery. And the whole thing had taken less time than an oil change. Louise and Fern hugged them both, quick and warm, and had to run back to the floor. And that should have been the end of the small, strange ceremony. 2 people doing a lawful thing for a good reason in an ugly room. But the hospital is a small town of its own, and news travels its halls faster than any patient can walk them. By the time Maren clocked in that night, the floor already knew. Owen came in near 10 to bring Maren the copy of the marriage certificate she needed for the benefits office, and he was walking down the corridor toward the nurse's station when he heard voices around the corner and stopped, because one of them said Maren's name in a tone that made him stop. The charge nurse was named Delphine Okoro. She'd run the emergency floor for 20 years, and she loved her nurses like a fierce aunt, and she did not, as a rule, raise her voice. She wasn't raising it now. That was worse. She had Maren backed against the medication room door, and she was speaking low and hard and fast. "You married the father of a patient," Delphine said. "A patient, Maren, on this floor. Do you understand what that looks like? Do you understand what it is? It's a conflict of interest with your name stamped on it. It's the kind of thing that ends up in front of a board. It's your license. 14 years of school and shifts, and it's your license. And you did it in a courthouse on your lunch break like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing, Maren said, and her voice was quieter than Owen had ever heard it. Then tell me what it was. Delphine wasn't cruel. That was the thing Owen would remember. There was fear all through her anger. The fear of a woman watching someone she loved walk toward a cliff. You've got the whole floor whispering. You've got people who like you making up stories about you. And if the wrong person hears it and decides to look, a man married to a mother of a sick kid right before a claim the size of a house, you know how that reads. You know it better than I do. That's not a rescue, honey. That's a target you painted on your own back. There was a silence. Owen stood frozen around the corner, the certificate in his hand, and he understood for the first time, fully, what she was risking. He'd been so deep in his own drowning that he'd taken the rope and never once thought about the hand that threw it. She wasn't losing money to help him. She was risking the thing she'd spent her whole life building. The license, the career, the standing. For his daughter. For a stranger's daughter. And she'd said it was just paperwork, and it was never just paperwork. And she'd known that when she offered. He should have walked away and spared her the shame of being overheard. Instead, he stepped around the corner, and both women looked at him, and something in his face made Delphine go still. It reads however people want to read it, Owen said. His voice was quiet too now, but I'll tell anybody who asks. She didn't come to me. I was standing in your break room with a piece of paper that killed my kid, and she's the only person in this building who did something instead of feeling sorry. If that costs her, then it costs me too, because I'm not going to stand here and let her carry it alone. Delphine looked at him a long moment. Then she looked at Maren, and whatever she saw in the two of them made her shake her head, and some of the anger went out of her and left only the worry, which is love with nowhere to go. God help you both, she said. You're going to need it. And she walked away to run her floor. Because that's what she did. She carried everyone. Maren let out a breath. She looked at Owen. You didn't have to do that. Neither did you, he said. He held out the certificate. For the benefits office. She took it. Their hands didn't touch. But something had moved in that hallway that hadn't been there in the courthouse. In the courthouse, they'd been two legal strangers. In the hallway, for the first time, he'd chosen to stand beside her when standing beside her cost something. She'd noticed that later. She noticed most things later and turned them over in the dark. The next weeks were paperwork, and there is a particular intimacy to paperwork that nobody writes love songs about. The benefits office needed the marriage certificate, a qualifying life event form, proof of residence, and a mountain of medical documentation to enroll Poppy as a dependent and submit the prior authorization all over again, this time under a policy that was actually active. Maren knew the language. Owen knew his daughter's history down to the milligram. So they sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he'd sat with his impossible $11,000, and they built the binder together. It took 3 nights. He watched her handwriting fill the forms, small and slanted and fast, the handwriting of a person who fills out forms for a living, and he found himself learning it the way you learn a language, the loop of her L's, the way she crossed her 7s like she'd been taught in another country. She watched him lay out Poppy's records. And among the medical papers were the drawings, because Poppy drew constantly and Owen kept every one, and Maren picked one up without meaning to and went still. It was a family. Stick figures, the way 7-year-olds draw them, big round heads and lines for bodies. A tall one with a square on its chest, which was the toolbox, that was Dad. A small one with blue lips carefully colored in, because Poppy drew herself honestly. And that was all. 2 figures. A father and a daughter, and a lot of empty white paper around them where other people might have been. Maren put it down carefully and didn't say anything, and Owen didn't either, and they went back to the forms. That was proof one if you're counting, and Maren was, though she'd never have admitted it. The night they built the binder, she stopped being the nurse who threw a rope and started being a person he knew. He learned her handwriting. She learned his daughter's inner life, drawn in crayon. Proof two came a week later. It was February cold, the mean kind of Ohio cold, and Owen stopped by Maren's apartment to drop off a signed form on his way to a night weld, and the building was freezing. Not chilly. Freezing, he stood in her doorway and saw his own breath, and he saw her wrapped in a blanket at her own kitchen table doing the same work for other people that she'd done for him, and something in him that could not stand a broken thing simply took over. "How long's your heat been out?" She waved a hand. "Landlord's working on it," which meant weeks, which meant it wasn't getting fixed. He was going to be late to the weld. He didn't care. He went down to his truck and got his bag, and he found the problem in the ancient furnace in her building's basement in about 20 minutes. A seized blower motor and a cracked igniter, both things he happened to carry. And he fixed it, and he came back up with grease on his hands and heat coming through her vents for the first time in a month. She stood in the middle of her warming apartment and looked at him like he'd done something enormous, which, to a person who'd been cold for weeks, he had. "I didn't ask you to do that," she said. "I know," Owen said, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's kind of the point." His hands, her cold rooms. That was the trade of it. She warmed strangers with her care and paid for it by going home to a place where her own breath fogged. He couldn't fix a heart. He could fix a furnace. It was the only way he had to give anything back, so he gave it. Somewhere in those weeks he learned how she took her coffee. He didn't set out to. He just noticed, the way he noticed a rattle in an engine, that she drank it scalding, no sugar, straight from the machine when it was too hot for anyone else to hold, both hands around the cup, like she was thawing them. So on the mornings their shifts crossed, he started having it ready. 6 a.m. A cup of coffee too hot to drink, waiting where she'd find it. She never said thank you for it, and he never said you're welcome. And that was somehow the most married thing about the whole arrangement. Then, on a gray Thursday, the benefits office called, and Maren called Owen, and he pulled the truck over on the side of a county road because his hands weren't steady enough to drive. "It went through," she said. "Coverage is approved. Effective the 1st. The prior authorization cleared this morning." A pause. "Owen, they scheduled the surgery. She's on the calendar." He sat on the shoulder of the road with the engine ticking and the phone against his ear, and he didn't say anything for a while. Because he couldn't. $214,000. 41 days that had bled down to 11. A valve on a clock. And a woman he'd married in a room with fluorescent lights had reached into the machine and turned the impossible into a date on a calendar. The relief that came through him was so total, it felt like grief. He'd been holding a weight for 18 months, and someone had finally taken a corner of it. And the muscles that had clenched around it didn't know how to let go. "Owen?" she said. "You still there?" Yeah, he managed. "I'm here." And then, because it was the truest thing he had, "Thank you doesn't cover it." "Then don't use it," Maren said, dry as ever. But there was something warm under the dryness now. "Go tell your kid." He told his kid that night. Poppy took the news the way she took everything. Seriously, weighing it. And then she asked if it would hurt, and he told her the truth, that it would hurt for a little while and then it would help forever. And she nodded like a small judge, accepting a fair sentence. And then she went and got her crayons. She drew for a long time at the kitchen table, tongue between her teeth. And when she was done, she got up, and instead of giving the drawing to her father, she walked it across the room to where Maren was standing, pulling on her coat for a night shift, and she held it up. Maren crouched down to look. 3 figures now. The tall one with the toolbox square on its chest. The small one with the carefully blue lips. And between them, a new figure, a little taller than Poppy, with a stethoscope drawn as a loop around its neck and hair, done in tight coils the way Maren wore hers. Above them all, in Poppy's painstaking uneven letters, 3 words. Our family. That's you, Poppy said, in case it wasn't obvious, which to her it clearly was. You go in the middle. Owen watched Maren's face. He watched the steady thing she wore over everything crack straight down the center, just for a second, just long enough for him to see something underneath it that he would think about for a long time, before she put it back and smiled, and told Poppy it was the best drawing anyone had ever made of her. And she didn't set it on the counter with the others. She folded it, carefully, along lines that wouldn't crease the figures, and she put it in the pocket of her scrubs, over her heart, where it would stay. Nobody said what it was. It was a paper marriage, and a child's crayon, and a coffee too hot to drink. It was a binder, and a furnace, and a hallway, where a man chose to stand next to a woman when it cost him. It wasn't love yet. They'd both have told you that, firmly, if you'd asked. It was just two people doing a hard thing well, together, and it happened to look, from a certain angle, like a family drawn in wax. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, pre-op the night before. Owen had the truck cleaned out, and Poppy's bag packed with her one good stuffed rabbit, and the electrical tape-decorated backpack she refused to leave behind. He'd talked to her about the hospital, about the mask that smelled like plastic and made you sleep, about how when she woke up the tired feeling on the stairs would start to go away for good. She'd been brave in the way that broke him, asking practical questions, making him promise he'd be there when she woke up. He promised. He'd have promised her the moon, and found a way to weld a ladder to it. The night before pre-op, Owen finally let himself feel something like hope. He sat on the edge of Poppy's bed after she fell asleep and watched her breathe, watched the small blue tinge at her lips that in a matter of hours would begin, at last, to fade. Down the hall his phone sat charging. Maren was off shift for the first time in days, home in her warm apartment, resting for the long day ahead. Everything was in place. The coverage held. The clock had been beaten. All they had to do was get to morning. At 11, he heard Poppy cough. At midnight, he heard her cry out. He was across the hall and through her door in 3 steps, and he knew before he touched her, he knew from 18 months of learning her body's alphabet. Her skin was too hot. Her breath came fast and shallow and wet. The blue at her lips had deepened, spreading, and her eyes when they found his were glassy and frightened. He put his hand to her forehead, and it was like touching a stove. Fever, a high one, come up out of nowhere the way they do in small children, sudden as weather. And he knew, with the cold, clear part of his mind that never fully panicked, exactly what it meant. You do not put a child under anesthesia with a fever spiking through her. You do not open a chest and touch a heart while an infection is loose in the blood. He knew, kneeling there with his daughter burning in his arms and the surgery hours away, that they would cancel it. That the window they had fought the whole world to reach might close on a fever that came up in the dark on the last night. He grabbed his phone with a shaking hand. Not the hospital. Not yet. There was one number he called without deciding to. One name his thumb found before his brain caught up. And it wasn't the surgeon, and it wasn't Delphine. It was Maren. And it was 3 in the morning, and she was off shift, and she owed them nothing more than she'd already given. The phone rang once in the dark, and Owen held his burning daughter and waited to see if the woman he'd married on paper would answer. She answered on the second ring. No hello. No fog of sleep. Just her voice, already awake, already moving. How high? Owen looked at the thermometer shaking in his hand. 103. Climbing. How's her breathing? Fast, wet the blues worse. He heard a drawer open on her end. He heard keys. Don't drive her yourself. Call it in. Get the ambulance. Tell them cardiac. Tell them pre-op tomorrow at Alderfield. Tell them fever of unknown origin. Say those words. They'll move faster. A pause. Fabric. A zipper. I'm already dressed. I'll meet you there. Maren, "You're off." "You don't have to, Owen." She said his first name, and it stopped him cold, because he had not once said hers out loud. Not through the whole cold marriage, not through the binder nights, not once. "Make the call." "I'm coming." The line went dead. He made the call. The ambulance took 11 minutes. He counted every one. He held Poppy on the couch with a wet cloth on her forehead and her rabbit tucked under her arm. The stuffed one, the gray one going bald at the ears, and he talked to her the whole time in a low, steady voice about nothing. About the yard, about the birds they'd put a feeder up for, about how the truck's heater still rattled. Anything. She watched him with those glassy eyes, and she believed him, because he was her father, and fathers do not lie, and he lied the whole 11 minutes about how everything was fine. At the hospital, they took her back fast. Cardiac kids get moved to the front of every line, and for once he was grateful for the thing that usually terrified him. He stood in the fluorescent hall in a coat over his sleep shirt, and he did not know what to do with his hands. Then, Maren came through the doors. Not in scrubs. That was the thing that undid him a little, if he was honest. She was in jeans and an old flannel, and her hair was down, and she looked like a person. Not a nurse, not a fixture of the floor, just a tired woman who had gotten out of a warm bed at 3 in the morning and driven across a dark county for a child who was not hers. On paper, she was that child's stepmother. On paper. She had a certificate to prove it and a $12 ring somewhere to make it real, and none of that was why she was here. She was here because she came. "They've got her," Owen said. "Fever, they're running blood." Maren nodded. She didn't sit. She stood next to him in the hall, close, shoulder almost to his shoulder, and she did the thing she did. The thing he'd watched her do at bedsides for weeks now. She got still. She got calm on purpose, so the calm would spread. "It might not cancel it," she said quietly. "A fever's not automatic. They'll culture it. If it's viral, if it clears, they postpone, they don't cancel. There's a difference. Postpone means we wait. Cancel means we start over." She looked at him. "We're not starting over." "We?" He heard it. He filed it somewhere he wasn't ready to look at yet. The blood came back near dawn. "A virus," the resident said. "A small, ordinary childhood thing that would have been nothing in any other child. A couple sick days, some juice, and back to school. In Poppy, it was a landmine. You could not put her under. Not like this." The surgeon came in gray, faced at 6, and said the word Maren had promised, postponed. 1 week. Let the fever burn out. Let the blood run clean. Then they'd try again inside the window. Barely inside. The 41 days the cardiologist had drawn on the calendar had 32 of them spent. A week would leave a handful. A week would leave almost nothing. "Almost nothing is still something," Maren said when the surgeon left. She said it to Owen, but she was looking at Poppy asleep now in the bed, fever broken to a simmer, rabbit under her chin. Owen sat down hard in the recliner by the bed. All the fear went out of his legs at once and left them useless. He put his face in his hands. He felt her hand on his shoulder. Just for a second, just the weight of it. Then it was gone, and when he looked up, she was pulling a chair to the other side of the bed, settling in, not leaving, and he understood that the paperwork wife was going to sit the whole night that she'd never signed up to sit. They didn't talk much those first hours. There wasn't a need to. She'd brought a paperback and didn't read it. He watched the monitors he'd learned to read. Around 4, she got up without a word and came back with 2 coffees, and she set his down on the tray in front of him. And he looked at it, and it was scalding. No sugar. Exactly the way he took it. Exactly the way he'd never told her he took it. She'd learned it the way he'd learned things about her. By watching. By caring enough to watch. He didn't say thank you. He just wrapped his hands around it and let it burn a little, and felt underneath the terror something he had no business feeling in a hospital room at 4 in the morning. Something that felt dangerously like not being alone. The week they were given was supposed to be a punishment. It turned into a gift, and neither of them would have called it that out loud. Poppy got stronger by the day, the virus burning down to nothing, her color coming back, and because she couldn't go home and back and forth to a house with no one in it, and because Owen couldn't take a week off welding without losing the work that paid for everything, they fell into a rhythm without deciding to. He took the days, Maren took the nights. They traded the vigil like a shift they'd worked together for years. He'd come in at dusk, smelling of flux and hot metal, and she'd stand and stretch and give him the report. What Poppy ate, what she drew, what the doctors said on rounds, and then she'd go, and then she'd come back at midnight anyway, in her own clothes, off the clock, and sit. He stopped pretending he thought she was leaving for good each time she went. They learned each other's silences that week. There is a kind of knowing that only happens in a quiet room over a sleeping child, when there's nothing to perform and nowhere to be, and the only sound is a monitor keeping time. He learned she cracked her knuckles when she was worried and pretended she hadn't. She learned he couldn't sit still, that he'd find the loose cabinet hinge on the med cart and fix it with the multi-tool he carried, that his hands needed a job or they'd shake. He fixed 3 things on that floor that week that nobody asked him to fix. The nurses started leaving him little notes. The door on 4, the wobbly IV pole. He fixed them all. It was the only way he knew how to say thank you to a building. One night, late Poppy deep asleep, he fell asleep himself in the recliner mid-sentence. He didn't mean to. 3 nights of no rest caught him and pulled him under between one word and the next. And in the gray hour he half surfaced, the way you do, not enough to open his eyes, and he felt something settle over him. A blanket. The thin waffle weave hospital blanket, still warm from the warmer down the hall. He felt her tuck it at his shoulder, careful, not waking him, or thinking she wasn't. Then he felt her stand there a second longer than she needed to. Then he heard her sit back down. He kept his eyes shut. He pretended he'd felt none of it. In the morning he folded the blanket and set it on the chair, and neither of them said a word about it. And that was its own kind of language too, the not saying. It was that same night, or maybe the next, the dark one's blur, that he told the ceiling the thing he'd never told a living soul. He thought she was asleep. She wasn't. Poppy's mother left 18 months after the diagnosis, he said, quiet, flat, to the ceiling tiles, to the dark, to no one. Everybody thinks it was all at once. It wasn't. She stayed a year and a half. She held on for the easy part, the scared part, the part where you cry and people bring casseroles. He breathed out slow. It was the long part that got her, the part with no end. The appointments that don't fix anything, just manage it. The bills, the being tired forever, a long pause. People stay for the hard part when the hard part's got a finish line. She figured out this one didn't. Another pause, longer. So I quit asking anybody to stay. Easier not to. You can't get left if you never ask. The room was quiet a long time. Then Maren's voice came out of the dark, even unsurprised. My brother had a valve thing too. Different, but same family of trouble. She said it to the ceiling, same as him. 2 people confessing to a hospital roof. He was 32. His claim got denied on a technicality, and he died mid-appeal, waiting for a word from a person in an office who'd never met him. I paid off what was left of his bills for 4 years after he was gone. Just finished last spring. She let that sit. So don't tell me about the long part. I know the long part. Owen turned his head. He could just see the shape of her across the room, sitting up now, both of them awake in the almost dark. You never said that, he said. The billing. In the break room. You said you knew how it worked. You said 4 years. But you never said. No, she said. I didn't. Neither of them said the next thing, whatever it was. But something moved in that room that couldn't move back. He'd told her the thing that made him leave Abel. She'd told him the thing that made her come. And the paper between them, the cold county certificate with the flat clerk's signature, had somewhere in the dark stopped being the only true thing about them and started being the least true thing about them. The felt turn, when it finally came the way real ones do. Not with music. With a joke. It was 2 days before the rescheduled surgery. Poppy was upright, pink, bored, which is the best sound a sick child makes. Boredom. She was drawing at the tray table, tongue between her teeth, and Maren was reading over her shoulder and Owen was fixing the cabinet hinge for the second time because he'd run out of other things to fix. And Poppy looked up at the two of them and said, in the pitiless flat way of 7-year-olds, "You two are so slow." "Slow at what?" Maren said. "Everything," Poppy said, and went back to her drawing, and Owen laughed. He actually laughed, out loud, in a hospital, for the first time in what felt like a year, and across the bed Maren laughed too, caught it off him the way you catch a yawn, and their eyes met over the top of a 7-year-old's head, both of them laughing at a kid's blunt little verdict. And it was nothing. And it was the whole thing. The laugh landed, and then it didn't quite go away, and they both felt it not go away, and Maren looked back down at the drawing too fast, and Owen turned back to the hinge too fast, and the room got warm and quiet. He said it that night. Not to her. To the ceiling again, because that was the only place he knew how to put true things. "I signed a paper to save my daughter." His voice was low, rough, careful. I don't know when I started meaning it. She didn't answer. But he heard her stop cracking her knuckles. He heard her go very still in the dark, the still she used on purpose to make calm spread. And he understood that she'd heard him, and that she hadn't said anything back, not because she felt nothing, but because she felt too much to trust her voice with it, at 3 in the morning, 2 days before someone opened their daughter's chest. Their daughter. He thought the word and didn't correct it. Then the letter came, and the world remembered it hadn't given them permission to be happy. It came as a phone call first, on a Tuesday morning, from a number Owen didn't know. A calm voice. A polite voice. A voice with a headset in it. Sentinel Health Alliance, Special Investigations Unit. A Mr. Bram Keller. He'd like to schedule a conversation regarding the recent enrollment of a dependent minor. Nothing to worry about, standard review. Owen's stomach fell through the floor, because he'd learned to hear the thing under the polite words, and the thing under these words was a trap, with the jaws still open. The paperwork came behind the call. A marriage registered 19 days before a $214,000 claim. A pattern. A flag. The word suspected marriage of convenience printed in a font that had no idea what it was talking about. Coverage frozen. Not denied. Not yet. Frozen pending interview. Pending a determination as to whether the union was, in the language of the letter, entered into in good faith or solely for the procurement of benefits. And the part that turned Owen's blood to ice, the part he read 3 times standing in his kitchen with the phone still warm in his hand, if the marriage were ruled fraudulent, the claim would be voided, and the insured party, Maren. They meant Maren, the insured party was Maren, could face charges. Insurance fraud. And with charges, a nursing board review. And with a board review, her license. 11 years of it. Gone. He'd married her to save his daughter, and he'd walked her straight into losing everything she was. They sat in his kitchen that night, the two of them, the frozen letter on the table between them next to the jar of cash and Poppy's crayons. Poppy was asleep down the hall. The surgery was in 6 days. The window had a week of air left in it, and now no coverage to fly through it. "I'll fix it," Owen said. His voice had gone flat and hard, the voice he used when a job went wrong on site, and there was no time to feel about it. "I'll call this Keller. I'll tell him the truth." "The truth is what he's afraid of," Maren said. "No. The truth he can use." Owen looked at her, and she saw his blind spot fire, saw it coming a half-second before he said it, and she was already shaking her head. "I'll tell him it was all me. That I talked you into it. That you're a good nurse who felt sorry for a desperate father and I pressured you. I leaned on you. I used you. I'll say you didn't want to. We get it annulled. You walk away clean. Your name's out of it, your license is clean, and He stopped. I take the fall alone. It's my kid. It's my mess. It should have always been mine alone. He built the whole thing in about 4 seconds. The escape. The way out. The way to leave before he got left. Dressed up as a way to protect her. Maren set both her hands flat on the table. Say that again, she said. The part where you leave me out of it. To save you. To save me from what? From you? Her voice didn't rise. That was the terrible thing about her. She never had to raise it. You want to walk into a beige room and tell a stranger our marriage was a lie so that I get to keep my job. And I'm supposed to sit at home and let you do that. Let you fall on the sword and call it love. She leaned in. You know what that is, Owen? That's leaving. You've dressed it up real nice, but it's leaving. It's you doing to me exactly the thing you told the ceiling you're so scared of. You'd rather be the one who leaves than risk being the one who's left. So you're going to leave first. Do it noble. Do it for my own good. He didn't say anything. Because it was true, and they both knew it was true. I told you why I said yes, she said, quieter now. My brother died waiting on a man in an office. 32 years old, mid-appeal, and the appeal was still pending when they turned off the machines. I paid his bills for 4 years so his kid wouldn't inherit them. 4 years. Her eyes were wet and furious. I did not marry you to save your daughter, Owen. I mean, I did. But that's not the whole of it. I married you to stop it happening one more time. To one more kid. To beat that office once. Just once. Before I die. And you want to take that away from me and make it a lie so I can keep punching a clock. She sat back. No, I'm not getting left out of this. You don't get to leave me to save me. We go in there together and we tell them the truth. And the truth is, it's real. Whatever it started as, it's real now. You said so yourself. To the ceiling, I heard you. The room was quiet. The frozen letter sat there between them, official and stupid. You heard me, Owen said. I hear everything, Maren said. It's the job. The interview was on a Thursday, 2 days before the surgery, with the window nearly shut, with everything hanging on a conversation in a room the color of oatmeal. Alderfield gave them a conference room, long laminate table, chairs that didn't match, a box of tissues nobody would touch out of pride. Bram Keller was already there when they came in, a man in his 40s with a soft face and a hard binder, and he was not a monster. That was the thing Owen understood the moment he saw him. He'd wanted a monster to hate. He got a tired man doing a job, a lanyard and a laptop, a man who probably believed most days that he was protecting honest people from cheats, the rules with a face on them. Through the glass wall, Owen could see them. Delphine, the charge nurse who'd cornered Maren weeks ago about conflicts of interest and gossip and risk. Standing in the hall with her arms crossed. Louise from respiratory. Fern from the lab. Waiting, witnesses, though nobody had used that word. Keller was polite. He always was. He laid it out flat. The timeline. 19 days. The dollar figure. The pre-existing condition that would have been excluded under any individual policy and was, conveniently, covered as a new dependent on a group plan. He used the word convenient without any teeth in it, which was worse than teeth. He asked his questions in order. When did you meet? How long had you known each other before the marriage? Do you cohabitate? He wrote the answers down. Then he set down his pen and folded his hands and looked at Owen. Mr. Marsh, for the record, in your own words, why did you marry Maren Osei? And Owen Marsh, who had planned to be smooth, who had rehearsed a speech in the truck about love at first sight and how they'd been secretly seeing each other for months, threw all of it away. He reached into the inside pocket of his one good coat. He laid 3 things on the laminate table, one at a time, and turned them to face Keller. The denial letter first. The original. Coverage terminated. The words he'd read twice before he understood them. The letter he had not crumpled because his daughter was in the next room. The letter he had smoothed flat with the side of his hand and taped to the refrigerator at her eye level, so he'd have to look at it every single morning and not forget what he was fighting. It was soft now from folding. It had lived in his pocket for weeks. The drawing second. Poppy's drawing. 3 stick figures under a yellow sun, holding hands, and above them, in the wobbling capitals of a 7-year-old. Our family. Maren had carried it in her scrub pocket over her heart for a month. She'd given it to him that morning without a word, and he'd understood. The ring third. The $12 courthouse gift shop band, in its little Ziploc bag, the cheap gold already going dull at the edges. Owen looked at Bram Keller across the table, and he did not perform. I married her, Owen said, so my daughter could live. He let it sit. That's the whole reason. On the day I signed that paper, that was the only reason. I'm not going to lie to you and say I was in love. I wasn't. I was a father who was out of road. She had a plan, and I had a dying kid, and we signed a paper in a room like this one. If that's fraud, then I'm a fraud, and you can do whatever you're going to do. He put his finger on the drawing. But you asked me why I married her. That's why I married her. You didn't ask me why I'd stay married to her. His voice caught, and he didn't fight it, let the crack show. I'd stay married to her for the rest of my life because I finally want to. It stopped being a paper somewhere in a dark hospital room, and I couldn't tell you the day it happened because I didn't notice it happening. That's how I know it's real. Nobody plans the day they fall. It just, the ground's different one morning and you realize you've been standing on it a while. Keller looked at the 3 objects on the table. He didn't write anything down. Then Maren spoke, and she did the thing that closed it. She had brought a paper of her own. She'd been holding it in her lap the whole time. Owen didn't know what it was. She slid it onto the table. That's a reimbursement claim, she said. For my brother's medical debt. $61,000 I paid out of pocket over 4 years, some of which, not all, but some, I could arguably recover through a hardship provision on my own coverage. My own coverage. The plan we're sitting here talking about. She looked at Keller steady. I've had it filled out for 2 years. I never filed it, and I want you to see me not file it. She picked it up. She tore it in half, then in half again. She set the pieces down on the laminate in a little pile next to the ring. If I married this man for money, she said, that's $61,000 I'd have gone after the first week. I'm a nurse, Mr. Keller. I know exactly how to file a claim. I've never filed that one, and I'm never going to. I don't want $1 out of this marriage. I don't want a reimbursement. I don't want an inheritance. I don't want a settlement. I married a man with a jar of cash on his counter and a truck he sold the title to. There's nothing to gain here. There's just them. She glanced at Owen, then back. You're looking for the profit motive. There isn't one. I already spent all the money I had on the last kid the system killed. This one I'm doing for free. The room was very quiet. Through the glass, Delphine had uncrossed her arms. Bram Keller sat back in his mismatched chair. He looked at the letter, the drawing, the ring, and the torn-up claim. Procedure had come into that room expecting to meet a scheme, and it had met something it had no box for on its form. He was quiet a long moment. Then he pulled his laptop toward him, and he typed for maybe a minute, and he turned it around so they could see the screen, and Owen didn't understand most of what was on it, except for 2 words near the bottom that he'd learned to love more than almost any 2 words in the language. Review closed. The determination, Keller said, and his polite voice had something else in it now. Something almost human, is that the marriage was entered into in good faith. Coverage is reinstated effective immediately. The claim will process. He closed the laptop. He gathered his binder. At the door he paused, and he looked back, and for just a second he was not the rules, with a face on them. He was just a man. I hope the surgery goes well, he said. And then he was gone. Owen sat there with his hand still on his daughter's drawing and found he couldn't stand up yet. The surgery was Saturday. 6 a.m. call. The window had 2 days left in it when they wheeled her toward the doors. The pre-op corridor was cold and too bright and smelled like every hospital everywhere. Poppy lay small on the big gurney in a gown printed with cartoon dinosaurs, the rabbit tucked under one arm, the drawing, she'd insisted. They'd let her, clutched in her other hand, going with her as far as the doors. Her lips were blue. They wouldn't be. After. That was the whole entire point of everything. They wouldn't be blue anymore. The surgeon came by in his cap, calm, confident, the good kind of tired. Window held, he said. Blood's clean. She's strong. We're go. He squeezed Poppy's foot through the blanket. See you on the other side, kiddo. They walked alongside the gurney to the red line on the floor, the line past which family doesn't go. Poppy looked up at the two of them from her rolling bed, and she wasn't scared, or if she was, she decided not to show it, because she was her father's daughter and her mother's absence, and something entirely her own. Take care of my drawing, she told Maren, and handed it up, the Our Family one, sun and stick figures. With my life, Maren said, and took it, and put it back in her scrub pocket over her heart, where it had lived for a month. The doors opened. The gurney rolled through. The doors shut. And then it was just the two of them standing at a red line in an empty corridor, with nothing left to do, and nothing left to fix, and hours of nothing ahead. Owen stood there and shook. Now that there was no job for his hands, they shook, and he did the thing his whole life had trained him never to do. The thing his wife leaving had welded shut in him 18 months ago. He turned to the woman beside him, the paperwork wife, the night nurse, the one who came at 3 in the morning in her own clothes, and he asked for something. He asked her to stay. He'd never once asked anyone to stay. You can't get left if you never ask, he asked. One word. It was all he had. Stay. Maren looked at him. She understood exactly what the word cost him, understood it better than anyone alive, because she'd heard him tell the ceiling why he'd stopped saying it. She knew this wasn't about the next few hours in a waiting room. She knew what he was really asking. She didn't answer with words. She reached down and took the $12 ring off her finger. The cheap one. The courthouse one, going dull at the edges. Owen's face did something. Some flinch, some old certainty confirming itself. She's taking it off. This is the part where they leave. He'd have let her. He'd have understood. And then she put it back on, slid it down her own finger, deliberate, her eyes on his the whole time. I could have asked for a real one, she said, along the way. You'd have found a way to buy it, you'd have sold something else, you'd have gone without. I never asked. You know why? She turned her hand so the dull little band caught the light. Because this is the real one. This is the one I put on in a fluorescent room for a stranger's kid. This is the one I wore covering you with a blanket at 3 in the morning. I don't want an upgrade, Owen. You upgrade a thing when the first one wasn't good enough. This one was always good enough. She closed her hand. I'm staying. I was always staying. You just finally asked. He pulled her in and held on, in an empty corridor, past the red line, while somewhere behind 2 doors a surgeon fixed the one broken thing in his daughter he'd never been able to fix with his hands. They waited 4 hours. Then 5. The clock on the waiting room wall was the loudest thing Owen had ever heard. Maren didn't leave his side. Delphine came, off shift in her civvies, and sat down on the other side of Owen without a word. The charge nurse who'd warned them, who'd talked about conflicts of interest and licenses and gossip on the floor. She'd come to wait too. At the 5th hour, the surgeon came through the doors with his mask pulled down, and Owen was on his feet before he knew he'd stood. And the surgeon smiled and gave them a thumbs up, the oldest and best signal there is, and said the words, "She did great. Valve's perfect. She's in recovery. You can see her soon." Her lips will pink up within the hour. That's the part that always gets the parents. Owen's legs went. Maren caught his arm. And Delfino Coro, 50-something, 20 years running an ER floor, the doubter, the warner, the one who told Maren in a supply closet that she was risking everything for a stranger. Delphine was the first one to reach for Maren, first to pull her into a hard, fierce hug, first to celebrate the thing she'd been the first to warn against. "You did good," she said into Maren's ear, gruff, so nobody else would hear the crack in it. "You did so good. Don't you ever tell me I said different." 6 months later, the kitchen is repaired. Owen fixed the cabinet hinge for good, and the heater rattle, and the loose board on the third stair. The refrigerator is clean. The coverage terminated letter is gone from it, long gone, and in its place. Framed, at a child's eye level, hangs a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures under a yellow sun. Except now there are 4. Poppy added a 4th scribble a few months back, off to the side, smaller, with long ears. The rabbit. Nobody had the heart to tell her a rabbit isn't people. In that house, a rabbit is people. Poppy runs the yard. That's the sentence Owen never lets himself get used to. She runs. Full tilt, screaming, chasing nothing, chasing everything, and her lips are pink. Pink as anybody's, pink as a normal kid's, and every so often Owen has to stop what he's doing and just watch her run and breathe through the size of it. It's a Saturday morning. Early, Maren's at the kitchen table with the paper and her hair down. Owen comes in from the yard, where he's been fixing the fence, and without being asked, without a word, he pours a coffee scalding, no sugar, and sets it down in front of her exactly the way she taught him without ever teaching him, by being watched. By being cared enough about to watch. Maren wraps her hands around it. She looks at the framed drawing on the fridge. 4 figures now. And she looks at the man who married her in a cold room to save a life, and stayed married to her because he finally wanted to. And she says the only dry thing there is to say about a heart that got paid back after all the years it spent paying. "Turns out I paid off the wrong debt for years," she says. "This one paid me back." Owen doesn't answer. He just puts his hand on the back of her neck, warm from the yard, and they watch their daughter run. Some families are born. Some are made the slow, ordinary way. And some get signed into being in a beige county room on a cold Friday, for all the wrong practical reasons, and then chosen into truth, one covered blanket, one scalding coffee, one 3 a.m. call at a time, until the paper that started as a lie becomes the truest thing in the house. Comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far Owen and Poppy made it.